What do you find in terms of sort of state of the nation, in terms of how organisations are actually approaching hybrid and to what extent they are actually leaning into it?
Yeah, I think one of the first things which really strikes me is the different interpretations of the word hybrid. So for some people, depending on your role in the organisation, it means, how do I run a workshop physically in person, with some people in person, some people, virtually. For them, that's hybrid. For other people, it's the flexible working strategy, it's the policies and procedures to where and when people do their work. So for some, that's what they mean by hybrid. I have some people who work from home, some people who work in the office, and we might have a mandated policy around you come in 2 days a week, or every fortnight you need to be in the office for 7 days. Every organisation has a different version of that. For some people, that's what they mean when they say hybrid. For others, it's an approach to leading and managing a business or teams. That's what they call hybrid. For others, it's about a hybrid transformation program. So hybrid means different things to different people. I think that's the first thing that has really come through very, very strongly. I think the other thing that I'm noticing as I'm talking to different leaders in a wide variety of organizations is how they've made the transitions. So what was the situation pre-pandemic about how people worked and where they worked? Then what happened during COVID, and what choices did leaders and businesses make about supporting people through that period of COVID, when we were very restricted with what we could do and where we could go? And then more interestingly, what have been their choices post-pandemic? So where have they taken a very dialogue-based, participatory approach of finding out from people what is it that they want to have as flexible working practices and policies? What are the things that are important to them? When they come into the office, what kind of environment do they want? Now, some organisations are doing that through what I would call a diagnostic approach. So they're sending out questionnaires and they're gathering data, and then people are looking at that data and making decisions. Some people are doing it in a very dialogic-based approach, which means that they're gathering people together and they're having those conversations with people and they're making meaning together. And then from that, collectively, they're coming up with what can we do about this? What are we going to do now? So there's a real difference in the way that people have approached it. And some people have just gone unilaterally, this is what we're doing. We are making a decision as the most senior leaders in the organisation. So that's fascinating. And then the fourth area that's really emerging is around what I'm now learning myself is more about workplace strategy. So when we have a space, we might have a working from home space, we might have hubs kind of like locally, and then we might have a big office or a head office or a place where a lot of people from our organisation would come together. And a lot of people now are starting to talk about how is that office space physically set up? How do we need to reconfigure the working space in our main office? Because people are thinking, how much space do we need? What's our financial exposure and liability in terms of office rentals? Do we own the freeholds of this building? Do we have it on a 10-year lease? When's our lease due up for renewal? So for some people, they're really critical business decisions that they're making. But then when they're thinking about reconfiguring the space, I'm encouraging them even in these calls to think about, sometimes we need to do really quiet, focused, concentrated work. And we need peace and quiet for that. We need to be in an undisturbed space so we can really get in the zone where we know we can do our best thinking and our best work. Now, for some people, that's working from home, because their working from home environment gives them that peace and quiet. For others, their working from home environment doesn't give them that peace and quiet. We shouldn't make assumptions that for everybody, working from home is the best place to be doing really quiet, focused, concentrating work. So they then may need some quiet, concentrating space in an office environment. That might not necessarily mean a a single person office, but it might require the layout of an office to have some really quiet working pods or individual desk space, which has got some sort of soundproofing around it. We then also need a space at work for where we may want to meet and collaborate and cooperate with our own team or with other teams. So we need sort of flexible meeting space, which is potentially in a room. But then we also need to think about how is that space equipped from a technology and an IT perspective to enable us to run something face-to-face, to enable us to run something virtually, and to enable us to run something as a hybrid environment. And how do we provide what technology means that everybody can be seen, can be heard, and can contribute? And then the final kind of space that organizations are discovering that they need is that community space, whether that's informal, kind of relaxing, connecting, conversational space, or whether that's space which is big enough to have, everybody in the office together for meetings. And it's generally a more flexible, movable space. But those three kinds of spaces are things that people are beginning to think about. And then the other piece of the whole, what does our workspace look like, is the accompanying maybe changes to ways of working, where physically people sit, and the behavioural change and culture change piece that may sit as a separate project underneath that. So how do we help people make that transition from the old space to the new space, which is a great opportunity to reset some organisational norms, maybe about meeting practices, maybe about how teams and departments connect and collaborate and update each other, how we book spaces when we're wanting to gather all of our team in the office for certain particular meetings, which we really want to make sure are face-to-face because they bring us connection. They enable newer members of our team to really feel like they have a sense of belonging. They enable people who are earlier on in their career to do networking, to understand, what it's like working in a marketing department versus a finance department versus an operations team versus sales. How else do we find out about different functionalities across a wide business when we don't have the same connection points? So those are some of the things that I'm noticing. There's some of the things that I'm kind of working on that I'm really curious about. There's like so much.
Wow, there's so much in there that you've shared. I guess a few things that really stood out for me there. I don't know if your research is going to be focusing on this, but it's just, so how the organizations that have approached it in sort of a diagnostic sort of consult and decide kind of approach versus a participative decision-making process, what does that create? And I guess there's obviously pros and cons for both, because you can't please everyone, can you? So how do you come to a decision that allows people to do their best work? And then just the other bit is that that potentially there's an opportunity for OD to be involved in office design or office move to really understand the different needs and and wants of their people to help their organizations really thrive, isn't it? And being very intentional about how you actually design the office space. Yeah.
And I think that, I think when I think about where could OD as a function add value, I think this whole piece about, because workplace strategy traditionally has been much more about, the ergonomics and the layout of an office, but now I think there's a real opportunity to embrace so much more from an OD perspective, so I think OD can have a really important role to play in making sure that workplace strategy and reconfiguring your office space is done in a way that embraces some of our OD principles and values in the way that we know that OD practice can add value.
Yeah, I guess if you compare it to more of the sort of manufacturing, they really think very carefully about how the production line works and how the different parts of machinery work across, and that's really designed but do we put the same amount of effort into how does the people element work as well, and as much thought into that as well?
And how do people, when we look at social capital, which is another new area for me, I mean, I'm learning so much just in the first couple of months of doing my of embracing into this doctoral inquiry of mine, social capital about how people connect through their organisational networks is so important. And there's some really interesting research that's been done about social capital pre-COVID, during COVID, and after COVID, which I don't have time to go into here, but it is it's another really interesting area to explore.